It all started with a fascination, a twisted obsession that pulled me in like a drug I couldn't quit. I had read about Akagahara, their suicide forest, years ago. The eerie stories, the unsettling legends, the countless accounts of people who had walked into its depths and never returned. I remember the first time I stumbled upon a forum where people discussed the forest in the most nonchalant of tones, as if they were talking about an everyday hiking trail. But those who had been there, those who made it out, spoke of a presence, something unseen that watched, something that followed, something that was hungry. At first, it seemed like just another morbid curiosity. But over time, the idea of visiting the forest began to gnaw at me, an itch in the back of my mind that I couldn't scratch. I spent months planning, reading everything I could about the place, its history, the tragic stories, the unsolved mysteries that loomed like an ominous cloud over the forest. The thought of standing there, surrounded by those towering trees, knowing the secrets hidden in their shadows. It was thrilling. But it wasn't just curiosity. There was something darker at play, something deeper pulling me to the forest. Something I couldn't explain, but knew I had to understand. Eventually, I convinced my friends to come with me. Ryan, a skeptic through and through, laughed at the idea of a haunted forest. He saw it as just another stupid tourist trap. Liz, on the other hand, was cautious. She agreed to go but made it clear she didn't believe in any supernatural nonsense. And then there was Sarah, my closest friend, the one who understood the darker corners of my mind. She didn't need any convincing. She was just as intrigued as I was. We booked our flights to Japan, and before long, we found ourselves standing at the entrance of Akagahara. The air was thick with humidity, and the dense canopy of trees overhead blocked out most of the sunlight. I felt an odd chill, despite the warmth of the day. Ryan cracked a joke about it being the perfect place for a horror movie, while Liz nervously checked her phone for a signal that would never come. Sarah was quiet, her eyes scanning the forest as if she already knew something none of us did. We walked in, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss beneath us. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for all of us to walk side by side. The trees were impossibly tall, their twisted limbs reaching for the sky, their bark dark and gnarled. It was beautiful, in a way. But there was something unsettling about it too, something wrong. The silence was suffocating. No birds, no rustling leaves, no sounds of wildlife. Just the soft thud of our shoes on the ground and our breathing. For a while, we joked around, snapping pictures and talking about how ridiculous the whole thing was. Ryan was already planning our next adventure, something equally stupid but far less creepy. Liz was more reserved, but I could tell she was trying to keep the mood light. Sarah, however, wasn't laughing. I noticed it first when I turned to say something to her, and she was staring at the trees with a look I couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, but something else, something darker. We kept walking deeper into the forest. The path was becoming less and less clear, the trees closing in on us. I remember thinking, at one point, how strange it was that there were no other hikers around. The forest was vast, but this wasn't a remote part of it. We were only a few miles in. I expected to pass other tourists, but it was just the four of us. No one else. Then, we found it. It was an old sign, barely visible through the trees. It was weathered and worn, the Japanese characters barely legible. Liz stopped to take a photo, and I stood beside her. Ryan and Sarah were ahead, talking about something I wasn't paying attention to. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the sign. There was something about it, something strange that I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to form a perfect circle around it, almost as if they were guarding it. Or maybe it was the quiet, the unnerving silence that had deepened the further we went into the forest. Liz's voice broke through my thoughts. "What do you think it means?" she asked, pointing at the faded characters. I couldn't read Japanese, but the words felt wrong. Disturbing. My stomach churned, and I realized with a sudden dread that we had been walking for longer than I thought. The sun was lower in the sky now, and the air had grown colder. Liz's smile faltered as she looked up at me. "You okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. My chest felt tight, like the air had suddenly thickened, pressing in around me. I turned to look at Sarah, who had wandered off the path and was standing a few feet away, her back to us. "Sarah." I called. She didn't respond. I took a step toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah." This time, she turned slowly, as if waking from a trance. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. I didn't need to ask what she had seen. It was written all over her expression. Something was watching us. Before I could speak, Ryan laughed loudly, breaking the tension. "I'm telling you, we're just in some tourist trap. There's nothing here but trees and..." He stopped when he saw Sarah's face. "What the hell's wrong with you?" I don't know," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I heard something moving behind me. It was close." Ryan scoffed. "Yeah, right. It's probably a raccoon or something." But I knew. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and I had this cold, sinking feeling in my gut. I couldn't explain it, but the air felt thick and suffocating, and every instinct in me screamed to leave, but we didn't. We stayed. As we continued deeper into the forest, things began to change. The trees grew closer, their branches hanging lower, blocking out more of the light. It was as if the forest itself was closing in on us, trapping us in a web of darkness. The temperature dropped. And the silence, God, the silence, became unbearable. I tried to keep my thoughts rational, but I couldn't. I had read the stories. I knew what the forest was known for. I knew about the suicides, the lost souls. I knew about the rumors of something darker lurking in its depths. But I didn't believe it. Not really. Not until we reached the clearing. It wasn't much of a clearing, really. Just a small, open area surrounded by trees, their branches drooping low, as though trying to keep something hidden. And in the center of the clearing, a pile of old clothes. There was something about the clothes that didn't sit right with me. They were torn, faded, and they were stained. "Jesus Christ," Ryan muttered. "What the hell is this?" We all stepped closer, our eyes scanning the area. I could feel my heart racing again, that same sick feeling twisting in my gut. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to leave. But something kept me there, something I couldn't explain. Something that made my feet move forward, even though every part of me screamed to run. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost like the wind, but unmistakable. It came from behind me. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Ryan rolled his eyes, stepping toward the pile of clothes. "It's just the wind, man. Get a grip." But I couldn't shake the feeling. I turned slowly, and for a split second, I thought I saw something. A shadow moving between the trees. A figure, too tall and thin, its outline blurred and indistinct, as if it were made of smoke. I blinked, and it was gone. "Okay, now I'm freaked out," Liz said, backing up a few steps. "This isn't funny anymore." Sarah was silent, her gaze fixed on the trees, her face pale and drawn. She was breathing heavily, her eyes darting back and forth as if searching for something. "Sarah?" I asked, but she didn't respond, and that's when I heard it again. The whisper. Louder this time. Clearer. "Help me." I turned to the others, my voice trembling. "Did you hear that?" They all nodded, their expressions turning serious, even Ryan's. We weren't alone. The forest was suffocating now. The air pressed down on us, thick and cold, like a wet blanket that clung to our skin. I could feel my breath coming faster, heavier. We should have turned back. I knew that now, in the deepest pit of my stomach. But it was as if something in the forest was holding us here, keeping us from leaving. We all stood there, frozen in place, staring at each other, as if waiting for someone to break the silence. The whisper had faded, but the tension in the air had only grown stronger. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. It was impossible, right? There was no one here, no one to whisper. "No one but us, okay," Ryan said finally, breaking the stillness, his voice laced with forced bravado. "This is getting ridiculous. It's just the wind, okay? We're all just spooked. Let's take a few more steps, and we'll get out of here." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that we were hearing things, that our minds were playing tricks on us. But a part of me knew that wasn't it. I could feel it in my bones, we weren't alone. Something was here, in the shadows, waiting, but I didn't speak up. Instead, I glanced at Sarah. She had gone pale, her eyes wide and unfocused, like she was seeing something none of us could. "Sarah." Liz's voice trembled as she called out to her. "Are you okay?" Sarah didn't respond. Her body was stiff, rigid. She was staring at something behind us, just beyond the reach of the trees. I turned my head instinctively, but I saw nothing. Only the forest, dark and silent, stretching endlessly into the distance. "Sarah." I repeated, stepping closer to her. Her lips moved, but her voice was barely a whisper, so quiet that I almost didn't hear it. "They are here," she murmured, her voice shaking. "They are watching us." I felt a chill run down my spine, like ice water poured over my skin. My heart raced in my chest. "What are you talking about?" Her eyes locked onto mine, wide and wild, and for a moment, I saw something there, a terror so raw that it nearly knocked the breath from me. "They are all around us. The people who never left," she whispered. "They are trapped here. They don't know they are dead." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I wanted to dismiss them, to chalk it up to fear or exhaustion, but I couldn't. The way she said it, the look on her face. I didn't believe it, but I felt it. Deep down, I knew she wasn't just talking about something she had read or heard. Sarah believed what she was saying. "Stop it, Sarah," Ryan snapped, but his voice was thin, brittle. His bravado was gone, replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite place. "This is just a forest. It's not haunted. There's nothing here." But his words sounded hollow, even to him. The tension in the air was unbearable now. The trees seemed to close in around us, their twisted trunks and limbs pressing down like they were inching ever closer, like they were aware of us, watching, waiting. Suddenly, Sarah let out a choked sob, her eyes darting around in a panic. "They are close. We need to leave. Now." Before I could react, I saw it. A shadow. A figure, just beyond the trees. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs unnaturally long. It moved with a fluidity that made my stomach turn. I didn't know if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but in that moment, I couldn't doubt it. It was there. Watching us. "Sarah, what the hell?" Ryan began, but his voice trailed off as he followed her gaze. The figure was moving closer, and then, it was gone, but the feeling, the presence, lingered. We could all feel it. Like something was drawing nearer, slowly, methodically, creeping just beyond the veil of the trees, waiting for the right moment to strike. Liz was the first to react, her voice trembling with fear. "We need to get out of here. Now." But we couldn't move. It was like the forest had a hold on us, like it was holding us in place with invisible strings. The panic was spreading, inching its way through us like a virus. We needed to leave, but something told me that we were already too far in. Then, without warning, the ground beneath us shifted. A low rumble, like the earth itself was groaning, shook the ground beneath our feet. I stumbled, almost falling, but caught myself on the trunk of a nearby tree. Liz screamed, her voice high-pitched, raw with fear. "Run," she shouted. We didn't hesitate. Our instincts took over, and we turned, tearing down the narrow path as fast as we could. The thick roots of the trees tangled beneath our feet, but we didn't care. We just had to get out. We had to get away from whatever was in the forest with us. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but as we ran, I heard something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A laugh. It was soft, almost childlike in its tone, but it carried an eerie, mocking quality that made my blood run cold. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the trunks around us, coming from all directions. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't. The laugh was real. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. The others had stopped too, frozen in place, their faces pale, eyes wide. But we didn't see anything. There was no one there. No figure. No shadow, yet the laughter continued. Louder now, ringing in my ears, as if it was inside my head, and then, as if the forest itself had swallowed the sound, it stopped. The silence returned, but it was even worse than before. We stood there, panting, afraid to move, afraid to speak. What the hell was happening? We couldn't be imagining all of this. It felt too real, too visceral. The way the air had changed, the weight of the forest pressing in around us. The way Sarah had reacted, the terror on her face. We were being hunted. We had to be. Sarah, I whispered, my voice shaking. What the hell is going on? She didn't respond. She was staring ahead, her face twisted in a grimace, her eyes wide and wild, like she was seeing something none of us could. Her breathing was ragged, shallow, like she couldn't catch her breath, and then, she collapsed. No. Liz cried out, rushing to her side. She shook Sarah, but there was no response. I knelt beside her, panic rising in my chest. Sarah, wake up. But it was no use. She was limp, unresponsive. I felt for a pulse, but there was nothing. Is she? Ryan trailed off, his voice cracking with disbelief. I didn't know. I didn't want to believe it. But I knew deep down, in the pit of my stomach, that something had taken her. Something in the forest. Something that had been watching us from the moment we stepped inside. The whispering started again. Low, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder. Closer. Help me. I turned and looked into the shadows of the trees, feeling the chill of something cold and unnatural wrap around my spine. We were no longer alone. We didn't run. Not at first. We stood there, paralyzed by fear, unable to process what had just happened. Sarah, our Sarah, was gone. 1 minute, she was there with us, and the next, she was lying motionless on the forest floor. It didn't make sense. How could this happen? What could have done this to her? The whispers had grown louder. More insistent. It was like they were coming from the trees themselves, from the very ground beneath our feet. A constant murmuring, rising and falling, as if the forest itself was alive, breathing with malevolent intent. Sarah, Liz whimpered, her hands shaking as she cradled her friend's head in her lap. No, no, no. Ryan had backed away, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His face was a mask of terror, twisted in a way I had never seen before, and then, just as quickly as it started, the whispering stopped. The forest fell completely silent. I don't know how long we stood there, but it felt like an eternity. The weight of the silence was crushing, oppressive. The air seemed to tighten around us, as if the forest was squeezing the very life out of the world. I was the first to break the silence. We need to leave. Now. But it was a mistake. I knew at the moment the words left my mouth. Something moved behind us. A figure, tall, skeletal, impossibly thin, stepped out from between the trees. It was wearing a tattered cloak of dark cloth, and as it moved, the shadows seemed to cling to it, wrapping around its limbs like tendrils of darkness. Its face was obscured, hidden in the deep folds of the cloak. But I could feel its eyes, cold, hollow eyes, boring into me. I froze. My blood turned to ice. I had heard the stories. The legends. The thing that haunted the forest. It was real. It was standing right in front of us. Run. I screamed, but it was too late. The figure raised its head, and a low, guttural laugh escaped from beneath the cloak. It was the same laugh we had heard earlier, but now it was amplified, coming from everywhere at once. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a sound of malice, a sound that had been waiting for this moment, waiting for us to venture too far into its domain. The figure moved closer, its long, twisted fingers reaching toward us. We should have never come here, Liz sobbed, her voice breaking. We're going to die here, but I couldn't think. All I could do was run. We turned, but the forest seemed to close in around us. The path we had taken, if you could even call it a path, was no longer visible. The trees had shifted, and the once familiar landscape had turned into a maze of towering trunks and gnarled roots. The way out was gone. The forest was trapping us here, weaving its web around us. Ryan was ahead of me now, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pushed through the underbrush. But I could hear the thing behind us, its footsteps slow but deliberate. It was gaining on us. I could feel its presence pressing down on me, suffocating me with every step I took. Ryan. Liz. I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. They were ahead of me, but the distance between us was growing. I didn't know if they were still behind me or if they'd vanished into the trees. The forest was alive with noise now, the sound of rustling leaves, snapping branches, low growls from all around. The whispers had returned, louder than ever, echoing from every direction. The laughter, now sharp and manic, reverberated in my ears, making my head spin. I ran, my legs burning, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't look back. I couldn't. I had to keep running, keep moving. I had to get out, but then I heard a sound, something not quite like the rest of the noises that filled the forest. It was a scream. Liz's scream. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. It came from behind me, from the darkness between the trees. Liz! I shouted, but my voice barely carried through the thick air. I couldn't hear anything anymore. No more whispers, no more laughter. Just the silence. The deep, suffocating silence. I ran back, my mind a blur, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't care about the forest anymore. I didn't care about the thing that was hunting us. I only cared about finding Liz. I couldn't leave her behind, and then I found her. She was lying on the ground, her body twisted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were wide, frozen in terror, and her mouth was open, as if she had been screaming when it happened. But there was no blood. No visible injury. I knelt beside her, shaking her, trying to get a response. Liz! Liz, wake up! Please! But there was nothing. Nothing but the emptiness in her eyes. I couldn't feel her pulse. She was gone. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. We were alone. The thing in the forest had taken her. Taken them both. I stumbled back, my mind spinning, my chest tightening with the weight of the realization. I was the only one left. The forest seemed to mock me. The trees closed in even tighter, the shadows growing longer, darker. It was like the forest itself was alive, feeding on my fear, on my helplessness. And then I heard it again, the whisper, "Help me." I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The voice was coming from all around me, from the trees, from the earth itself. It was too late. The thing had already taken my friends. And now, it was coming for me. I couldn't run anymore. I was too exhausted, too terrified. I stood there, frozen, waiting for it to come, and then, just as I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, I saw something. A figure in the distance, standing in the shadows between the trees. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was waiting. Watching. I didn't know if it was real. I didn't know if I was losing my mind. But in that moment, I knew one thing for certain: I would never leave Akagahara. Not alive. I turned and began to walk, the footsteps echoing through the empty forest. The whispers followed me. The shadows swallowed me whole, and in the distance, I could hear it again. The laugh. A laugh that would never stop,